Welcome to the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast
with our mom,
Misty Bailey. Tips and encouragement
for
real-life homeschooling
is headed your way.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast. I am Misty Bailey, blogger at Joy in the Journey and podcaster here at Joyfully Homeschooling. Can you believe, guys, that we are in March? March! That is craziness. The school year is flying by. As I am recording this episode, we are gearing up for our 100th day of school. Now, my girls and I talked about this way back in a couple episodes ago. It was right before Christmas, where we chatted about what my kids really think of homeschooling. And the girls made fun of me in that episode and about all of the fun things that I had tried to do for him and how all of these fun memories that I thought we had from homeschooling, they thought were like a little like, really, Mom? But I thought they were fun. So anyway, we decided that for this year, for our 100th day of school, we told them we were doing nothing for the 100th day, nothing, that they are too old. And they have seemed really, really bummed about it. And I told him, I'm like, well, we're going to do all those fun things with Daniel that you guys, didn't really like as a kid, but Daniel never got them. And they're like, well, we didn't say we didn't really like it. And it's been this whole big back and forth. So we told them they're too old to celebrate the 100th day of school. And really, though, we have a super fun surprise day planned for them. We are going to go to the Dayton Air Force Museum. And we went over this summer after my daughter's Worldview Academy camp at Cedarville University, but we didn't have time to see it all. She was super tired, and, that place is huge. I mean, I'm talking huge. We were there for like 4 hours and didn't even get through all of the buildings. So they've been wanting to go back, and now we are, but they don't know that we're going back. So I think it's going to be a super fun 100th day of school, and that will have already come and passed by the time this episode airs. But maybe you guys have seen it on Instagram, and now you're hearing the story behind it. So, speaking of Worldview, it was about this time last year when we first heard of Worldview Academy, and my daughter paid her $100 deposit out of her own money with the intention of raising money and being able to go, and she did. And she learned so much. Worldview Academy is amazing. It is a Christian leadership camp where they learn all about apologetics and witnessing to people and about having a strong faith in this horrible culture that we're living in. And I actually learned about Worldview Academy through the Heidi St. John podcast. And through her code, we were able to get $100 off of Allison's admission into Worldview for the first time. And now, if any of you guys want to register for Worldview Academy, you can get $100 off through our admissions code, which is 2520. And check it out. I think it's worldviewacademy.org. I'll leave a link in the show notes. But she's planning on going back this summer. She's not only been saving for a mission trip to Spain, she's also been saving for Worldview Academy. She still talks to her roommate from Worldview, her small group leader. Like, they have like a email thread where they email and check in once a month or so with each other. And it was just an amazing, life-changing experience for her. And I would love for your kids to be able to go as well. So if you have any questions about Worldview, send me an email, misty@joyinthejourney.net. And if I can't answer the question, Allison may, or we can be able to put you in contact with somebody who can. But it's an amazing experience, guys. Promise. So now, let's get on with this episode of the podcast. So, one of the most popular podcasts ever is the one on homeschooling a child with ADHD, and that is episode 28 if you want to go check it out. And today we're going to talk about homeschooling the distracted child. And this is coming from a blog post that I wrote 3 or 4 years ago, and I'm just going to, go through the blog post and then kind of add some things that we have done or how things have changed since I wrote this. But I wanted to share, as I'm going through this, that 3 years later after I wrote this, this is still something we struggle with. even as my kids are now in middle school and high school. I have one that's super distracted, and I have one that is able to get their work done and move on. And actually, I think the one that moves on, at least at the time that I wrote this, now has more problems getting distracted, but still not to the capacity that the other child does. So I'm working with my youngest while my older two are busy with their schoolwork. We finish our lesson and I check on the other kids. One has her work complete and the other is staring at a blank page. She insists she was trying. She was just distracted. A distracted child. This has been a common occurrence in our homeschool through the years. When left undealt with, it means long homeschool days, a frustrated homeschool mom, and a child who is constantly unable to focus. So, what has been the solution to homeschooling a distracted child? The first tip that I have is to eliminate distractions. So, this has been number one for my distracted kiddos. At the time that I wrote this blog post, our homeschool room was also our playroom. So this meant that it's bright and colorful and full of toys and had numerous windows all around, which was not the best environment for a distracted child. So when we had this space, here are some things we did to eliminate the distractions. The first is we kept school separate from play. So the room had an imaginary line down the middle, and I actually have a video and a blog post about what our schoolroom looked at this time, and I'll leave a link to that in the show notes. So it had an imaginary line down the middle, and toys were not allowed to be on the play side during school. And we also made sure that all the toys were put up before we started school. The next tip was to keep the child away from windows. So the girls' table at that time was now against the wall away from the windows. So we also make sure that the blinds were closed throughout the room so they were not distracted by what was outside. Allow the child to work in a private area. So one thing that at the time that I wrote this was frustrating was that we had this big, nice schoolroom, yet the girls rarely actually worked in it because it was so distracting. It got too distracting while I worked with their brother. So I let the girls go into their room, our dining room, or even do school on the couch, wherever they felt the less distracted. Now we no longer have that schoolroom. We ended up turning it into like a teen hangout room. It's still got like a little toy box in it. Kristen does school in a corner in that room. Allison does school in her bedroom. And me and Daniel do school at our dining room table. So we kind of outgrew the schoolroom space. But those were some tips that we had at that time. But one reason we did move out of that space was distractions. It was too distracting to have everybody in there all doing school at the same time when they were all three working on different things. It was just way too much. The next tip is to respect school time. So this means no TV, no cell phone, music, or visitors. These are all things that distract a highly distractible child, and you need to keep this rule for yourself and for your children. It's hard, I know, but it is the best way to eliminate some homeschool distractions. And they really, really help you and your child focus on school. So next on the list, try to understand your distracted child. So for the longest time, I mean, as many of you know, my son Daniel has ADHD, but one of my girls has ADHD and the other definitely has some executive functioning difficulties. So when I wrote this post, I was writing it geared towards the girls, not my son, who I've talked so much about with ADHD. And as my girls were young and we were homeschooling and they got closer to that middle school age, I didn't fully understand ADHD or executive functioning as much as I do now because my son was just so in your face with his struggles. I really, really blew off my child's ability to get distracted, and I blamed her. I would tell her to just stay focused. I would get frustrated, and I never really tried to understand my distracted child, and I was wrong. And if you have a child who's easily distracted, it is so, so, so important to try and understand the way their mind works. For my daughter, every noise, every movement causes her mind to stray. The windows open gets her mind wandering. Her brother playing in the other room makes her wonder what she is missing. Her mom on the phone means that problems she doesn't understand can wait for a while. Hey, guess what? That means the whole lesson can wait, right? Squirrel! And they wander into the other room. But when we try to put ourselves in our children's shoes and we begin to understand how their mind works, we really, really can come to a point of understanding how our child gets so distracted. And that's the point where I was with this post. I was in the middle at the time of getting Daniel's ADHD diagnosis and really starting to understand the distractedness that my daughter was having. And it's so important to try to put yourself in your child's shoes and try to understand how their mind works. And I recommend, if you have a child that's distracted, to go back to the episode with ADHD. Even if your child you think doesn't have ADHD, look into executive functioning. Look into just the attention side, the ADD. Just look into that, because not every person has the hyperactivity part of attention deficit disorder. And having some compassion and understanding for our kids is so important. So the next thing I want to talk about is how to help a child that gets distracted. So as parents, sometimes we have to face reality. And one area I had to overcome when it comes to homeschooling my distracted child is the reality that my expectations were too high. The truth is, when we are parenting a distracted child, we have to be realistic. So here is our reality. And this reality still stands 3 to 4 years later. We've not really changed a lot of this. So the first is to have shorter lessons. So a child who's easily distracted needs to have lessons that are shorter than what you may expect. This helps them keep their focus longer. So I let mine do half a lesson, take a break, and come back. Or if it is a particularly difficult subject or topic that they're working on, I set a timer, and when it goes off, they can be done with that subject. I have kept this tip even now through my son Daniel. We've implemented a lot of these strategies with him. Now, my older girls, they work really on their own now, but I let them take breaks. I let them work their lessons out the way that they need to. I have one child who likes to do all of their math in one day, all of their science in one day, all of their history in one day, because it says it helps them, instead of focusing on one subject to another subject and jumping around, they're able to just hone in on that one subject, and it really helps keep them from being distracted. So that's just a tip. Find what works for your child. And especially as they get older, let them take more control of their education and let them figure out how they learn best and how they can do their school to the best of their ability. Podcast sponsors make the Joyfully Homeschooling podcast possible. So let's take some time to learn more about our current podcast sponsor, Bookshark. Bookshark homeschool curriculum is literature-based, 4-day, and faith-neutral. You can see it at bookshark.com. Amber Reed Davis, a busy homeschool mom, says, "We can't say enough good stuff about Bookshark. We're doing levels 3 and 5 this year. My kids are hooked. Through the amazing books, we've traveled to fascinating places and learned so much, and we're only on week 13. Who knew a middle schooler would ask if we could still do school on our 5th day because he wanted to find out what happens next in the books we're reading? Also, I've been amazed at how much I've learned through reading along with him. Oh, and the 4-day schedule is perfect. We use our 5th day to catch up, or just for fun field trips, experiments, and messy art projects." Amber is right. Bookshark's fully planned 4-day homeschool curriculum flexes to match your busy lifestyle. The detailed instructor's guides lay everything out so clearly that you are prepared to teach in mere minutes each day. Open your guide, gather your resources, which are all included in your package, and go. Curriculum for ages 4 through 16 is available in all subject packages or by individual academic areas: reading with history, language arts, science, and math. With Bookshark's literature-rich programs, your children will read, or have read to them, 35 to 50 engaging books each year. Visit bookshark.com to browse curriculum, download samples, or request a catalog. That is bookshark.com. There, you can browse curriculum, download samples, or request a catalog. Now let's get on with the podcast. So the next tip is to look into interest-led learning. So the best thing I did for our homeschool was allowing my kids to choose what they learned in some subjects. And by doing this, the girls were able to choose things that will hold their interest. And for a distracted child, this is so important. And I still do this. My kids still have to do math and language arts. But I've kind of let them even have some leadway in the math and language arts department into what they learn. They kind of pick their own science curriculum. They pick their own electives. They have to do school. They have to do certain subjects. So we're definitely not on the unschooly or fully interest-led learning path. But I do let them have some choice and some selection into what they study, as long as we get our basics covered. I don't really care as long as the basics are covered. The next is sometimes together isn't better. So my girls learned together for most of their homeschooling days, but the year that I wrote this blog post was the first year that we separated them. And it turned out learning together was more of a distraction than a help. And this doesn't mean it'll be the case for your child, but definitely consider it as a possibility if the time comes, and it is. And I have to say, 3 to 4 years later, this was the best decision we ever made. My girls could not handle learning together. They needed to kind of each focus on their own thing. They got distracted by each other. I'd have one that want to boom, 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 get it done. I'd have another one that was squirrel and constantly distracted, which held the other child up. And it was really, really hindering their relationship having them together. So I can say that this was still the best choice for my kids. And the next tip I have is realize that you can't set it and forget it. So what does this mean? It means your distracted child may not be able to learn independently as early as some kids. They will require gentle reminders. They will need you to check in on them. They may need you to sit next to them or stay in the same room until they are able to learn how to best avoid distractions. And this is a really good tip, because I found that one of my girls was able to kind of go off on their own, and they were able to go off on their own and work more independently earlier than the other girl. And now with my son, now that he's in second grade, I can see that he's going to be learning independently even later than his sister has been. And now my girls are in 7th and 9th grade, and they both are able to work pretty independently, but I still have to go in and check on them. I check in on them at least once every hour. Hey, how are you doing? Just to kind of see where they're at with their work and kind of to help them look at their schedule and see what all they still need to have done. Another tip I have in regards to this is if you have a child that's distracted easily, it is very, very, very important to not just hand them their work and have them do one lesson each day and get it done. You've got to check in on them. So one of my girls has a planner, and in the planner, I write out what they need to do each day. But they can look at their planner a week at a glance, you know what I'm saying? They can open it and they can see what their week looks like, what they have to get done. And then they can kind of choose which order they want to do everything, and they can mark it off. But the physical act of marking off the schoolwork is so, so, so important for them. When they were a little bit younger, I had these planner sheets, which I still sell, and you can, I'll leave a link to them in the show notes. I had planning sheets where I just wrote out each day. I used the simple notebooking method that Sarah McKenzie talks about on her blog. And I would just write out each day what they needed to do. And that way they could see at a glance what all they needed to do each day, and they could physically mark it off. I still use that method for Daniel today. But being able to see what they need to do is really, really important. But it's also so important for you to go back behind them and follow up and make sure they're getting their work done. Otherwise, you end up on Friday with the kid who didn't do part of the work all week, and they have 2 or 3 days worth of work to do. Believe me, I know this. My other daughter has a Google Doc where I write in her assignments. And I write hers out by subject, not by day. And she kind of marks it off with like the strikeout option with Google Docs. But one time, this was right before Christmas break. I normally check the girls' work every week or every 2 weeks, and I make out their schedules and what all they need to get done for 1 to 2 weeks at a time. Well, between Thanksgiving and Christmas break, I didn't do that. I sat out over Thanksgiving break and wrote out everything they needed to do for the next 3 weeks. And then I didn't check it. I was like, well, I'll just check it over Christmas break. One of my 2 children ended up doing schoolwork all Christmas break because in their mind they thought, oh, well, I have 3 weeks to do school. And they would take a day here and not do as much, or take a day there and not do as much. And without realizing it, they ended up super duper behind on school. And yeah, that was my distracted child. So it's important to follow up and check their work, because even if you do have it down in print, if you're not following up, if you're not checking up and making sure that it's done, those kids can get so distracted. And it is an executive functioning deficit. It really, really is. But we need to teach them to be responsible and to teach them and follow up. And if we don't do that now, imagine what it would be like if they get into college and they don't know how to manage their time. They don't know how to eliminate distractions. Another tip that we have enjoyed is having noise canceling headphones. That is a big, big, big help for my kids. Also, we've tried diffusers in the rooms, and that helps. One of my kids likes candles. They like the scent of candles. It helps them focus. Teaching them to do little mind breaks to where they get up and move like every 5 or 10 minutes. Or not every 5 or 10 minutes, but every half an hour get up and move, or every hour get up and move for like 5 to 10 minutes. That is also a really big help. But I just want to encourage you, if you are homeschooling a distracted child, that there is hope. I have junior high schoolers now that still struggle with distraction, but it has gotten a lot better through the years. It really, really, really has. And we've implemented many of these tips. I can tell you that they all still seem to be working 3 to 4 years later. I'm using them still with my son. And we're making it. And you can make it too. Having a distracted child is not the end of the world. You can homeschool them. They will be effective learners and will not be living in your basement for the rest of your lives. So you can do this. Until next time, sweet mamas, head out there and have a more joyful homeschool. Have a blessed and wonderful day, guys. Bye. This has been an episode of the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast. I thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please take the time to leave a rating or review on iTunes or whatever platform it is that you use to listen to this podcast. That tells the powers to be I'm not talking to myself. Also, hit subscribe. Then you will catch every episode of the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast each week right there in your podcast feed. You can find show notes and more at joyfullyhomeschooling.com and clicking on the episode number of the episode you are looking for. Thanks, guys. I hope this podcast encouraged you to head out there and have a more joyful homeschool.